Hello, it's Roger Bisbee here from the Skill Builder channel, and I'm joined by Duncan today, and Duncan's got a tale of woe. Just listen to this one.
Good morning, Roger.
I dare to ask how you are?
You know what? All things considered, I'm trying to put a smile on my face, but it's been a hell of a ride. It's been a rocky few years anyway. I was in need of just getting it out of the city, and a year after moving, well, I had got a RICS Level 3 survey.
That's the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, for anybody that doesn't know that.
And it said the house and the roof, given the age of the property, were in pretty good condition. The house was a bit of an odd one. It backs onto woodland. It's in a beautiful spot. And I bought it for the location and the proximity to my daughter. The house itself is a combination of brick cavity on one side and solid old sandstone walls on the other, which used to be an iron forge. Someone came along and bolted a bit of brick on the side in the 70s and called it a house. I had a big old oil boiler and an oil tank at the back, which took up a lot of space. And I came across Eco4 as a government grant, and it was a bit of a source of hope at the time. And it offered what I thought would be a bit of comfort and relief. Along came a particular well-known installer. They're generating, I think, about 35 million in profit at the moment, built purely out of this government scheme and others. They've grown into a very substantial company off the back of government funding. So the promise is not just for myself, but for many others in my position, the promise of a more affordable heating solution for the home, consisting of an air source heat pump and solar panels, larger radiators, ventilation, and all the rest of it. Loft insulation, that kind of thing.
Very often you take out your oil boiler, put in an air source heat pump, put in solar panels. Were they also talking about putting in some kind of mechanical ventilation heat recovery system, or was it just extractor fans you're talking about?
It was the basic, I think it's called an MHEV, isn't it? The basic kind of level of mechanical extraction that pushes air through the house.
Something that would get rid of condensation and so on, would tackle any problems like that.
Our chat comes at a really important time because it's been widely reported this week. You might have seen the BBC coverage. It's been in most newspapers that half of the homes fitted, in fact, more than half of the homes fitted with solid wall insulation since 2022 under schemes such as Eco4, which is the one that I've had real challenges with, are defective. And that's a total of 30,000 homes. So 30,000 homes have defective insulation, and the minister herself has referred to this as systemic failure. Us homeowners are made a ton of promises, but the reality is often far removed from those promises. Governing all of this is something called the PAS standard. The latest iteration, PAS 2035, I believe, is actually a really good set of standards. But really no homeowner should be in a position where they've got to read the full extent of PAS standard.
No, people blame the homeowner. Our viewers, a lot of them blame the homeowner and say, well, you should have done your research. Well, I think it's unreasonable. The little old lady who's suddenly got to become a blooming expert in all these different subjects is ridiculous. You know, you should be guided by the experts, and you should have a product that's fit for purpose.
PAS stipulates that a vulnerability assessment should always take place. And vulnerabilities include things like my own ADHD diagnosis through to the old lady that you mentioned, of which there are many, because they're actively sold these solutions as being solutions that are going to improve their lives without them having any technical knowledge or background. So those vulnerability assessments are absolutely critical. But in the real world, they're not in play. There's also stipulations, of course, that there's got to be contracts in place and everything's clear ahead of time. And of course, none of these things happen in reality. Let me tell you exactly what's happened. So I've had no heating for 2.5 years now.
You had an oil boiler, which was working. And how much was that costing you roughly to heat your home?
The oil boiler was a system that operated, as you probably know, at around 60 degrees C. You can switch it on or off according to your heat demands. So my total oil heating costs, even in the energy cost crisis that we experienced, it totaled £1,000 for that year, or just under £1,000 that year I paid on oil. So the forecast costs of the air source pump were over £3,000 a year. The message was that represented a clear saving for me. because it was based on the total heat loss for the home. Those heat loss figures are at the heart of this solution. They're so important when it comes to air source pumps. This is where the critical errors started amassing. Underpass, there's a role called a pass coordinator, and that person has to visit the property underpass 2035 to make a valid assessment of that property and to understand as best they can the accurate heat loss so that a correct heat pump can be sized for that property. Now, in my own case, the initial assessment did not involve a pass coordinator. No one visited the property with that skill set. All of the calculations were done remotely, and a figure of 5,300 kilowatts was devised. The actual figure, they later revised to 8,300. They've changed the radiators 3 times in total. And my own calculations, Roger, based on what was actually installed, was 13,300 kilowatts, and at home of my structure and age, the default industry total is about 22,000. So as you start to make improvements to that figure, obviously that comes down, but
Wow, yeah.
I believe it's 13.
The bit of brickwork that's been added to the old forge, that's cavity wall, is it?
Yeah, so this is a great example of what's happened here, is that their spec deemed that cavity was on average 105 mil wide.
Yeah.
In line with modern cavities. But the reality is it's a badly built building, and it ranges in cavity width between 30 mil to 70 mil. So obviously the spec that they have doesn't reflect the fabric of the building. Then you size a heat pump to match a spec that's not the reality of the building.
This is a very difficult one to get a figure for. We're not talking about homogeneous materials. We're not talking about aircrete blocks or something where you can say, look, this has got a given R value. That stone and everything else can vary tremendously. So getting a realistic assessment of that would be quite difficult. I feel for them on it. I don't think it's an easy one to go for. But if you've got a heating system which is versatile, i.e. one that you can turn up or down according to the weather, when you've got a heat pump, it's absolutely critical that you size it correctly for the property. Now, if you don't know what the property's doing, then the only thing you can do is put in a larger heat pump than you need, or, as I suggested to Heat Geeks at one point, go for some supplementary heating for those times when the heat pump won't do the job, but then they throw their hands up in horror at that idea. The thing I think they really need to get off the government is this dogma that you do away with the oil boiler or the gas boiler, you put in the heat pump, and that's the solution. Because it may well have been for you that keeping the oil boiler, putting in the heat pump and running them together, which you can get the controllers and the software to do that, would have been the best solution for you. But they won't allow that. They won't give you the grant on that because it's all about carbon. Let's reduce the carbon. Sometimes it's not realistic. What kind of electricity supply have you got to that house? Is it underground or is it an overhead power supply?
It was overhead, now it's underground, but it's only single phase.
So it would have struggled if we were looking at the top end of that heat pump requirement. The single phase would have struggled anyway, wouldn't it?
After it became clear, Roger, that the house was not heating, it basically, I couldn't get it beyond 16 degrees on some days, 18 degrees when it was warmer outside. It was reaching that threshold so that if I had set the thermostat to, say, 23 as a boost, to really kind of ebb it on, it would not get past 18 as a maximum. And when it tried to do that, when it tried to push on past, obviously it just kept consuming more and more in line with its capacity as a heat pump. I was hitting 50 kilowatts a day, and then it was wanting more and more. So at 50, I was just like, that's 15 quid. Like, I was working, and it filled me with dread and fear, just the thought.
Have you got a wood burner in there or anything like that?
At the time, I had a wood burner. So, the situation got far, far worse. 3 of the external walls didn't end up being insulated. It was because the rooms are quite small, and when you walk through the doors, they were going to install insulation that was 100 mil past the door.
Internal insulation we're talking about, rather than external wall insulation, yeah. Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, so if you open the door, obviously you wouldn't be able to walk through it, which I guess presents. But they gaslight you, and they say, well, the homeowner said that he wanted to be able to walk through his door, so he didn't want insulation.
Yeah. You wanted to be able to walk through your doors. That's a bit unreasonable.
I know what I'm not sure what I was thinking. There's a really important point here for policy designers, because the past standards are really, really good. You know, they make all of this clear. It's got to be designed for the home and for the homeowner. So if the installation blocks a door from opening, I mean, building regulations would have a field day, I'm sure. Beyond that, the design should stipulate all of this. A sound design would never have, you know, put those obstacles in the way. But of course, the installer then goes and blames the homeowner. And furthermore, they refuse to update, and this is critical, the heat loss calculations or the design. And the reason they do that is they don't want to admit that any mistakes have been made. Then amending that design means that they've got to uprate the size of the heat pump to a bigger model that requires three-phase energy. Then their bill grows exponentially. There's no one in the industry, there's no accrediting body that is happy to or able to go back and revise heat loss or past designs after the event. They rely entirely on the installer's testimony.
They rely entirely on that initial survey, because they're not going to deviate from that initial survey. They're not at any time going to turn around and say, well, in reality, this hasn't worked. You know, we're getting figures, because they can tell you what the figures are from the heat pump, and they say we're getting figures way above what we estimated for, but of course you've got no comeback. And by law, you're not allowed to reinstall or reinstate that oil boiler. You can't turn around and say, all right, now I want my boiler back. I think, you know, there's a mis-selling thing going on here, you know, and I've said it for a long time, that these guys are definitely, not just them, it's the government, it's the whole thing. It's the idea that you give these grants to these private companies and they're incentivized to just get the job done and get out of there, take your money and run. And when they do run, they don't want to know you, you know, to the point where they stop taking your calls.
Well, dare I say, the installers know that they exist within a system where they're allowed to drive maximum profits at homeowners' costs without penalty. And whilst the past standards are really good, there's no one enforcing them. And then add to that across the industry, there's all these different accrediting bodies, none of whom provide a whole home approach.
So tell us about your solar panels, because I think there's a story on your solar panels as well, isn't there? You had some solar panels put up.
This is the madness, is that I guess the heat pump alone would be a story in itself. But the reality is, Roger, that wasn't the worst of it. So the solar panels were installed on my old cottage. The roof was already a little bit crooked, to say the least. Rather than doing a full structural survey of the roof, they did a visual inspection, which was a quick glance in order to prove I was eligible for the grant. So the installer's interest was not my own. They weren't trying to protect me or my house. They were just simply trying to get money from the government to install a load of panels and run away. When those panels went on, now bearing in mind at the time, my insomnia was really very severe. I wasn't functioning. And so I was sat there 4 a.m, routinely listening to Bang Crap Wallop through the night in all weather conditions and thinking, oh my God, you know, any time now, my world's going to come crashing in. So I got in touch with the installer and I said, look, this is happening. This can't, you know, waited months and months. This can't go on anymore. What's the story? And they said, well, don't worry. We've done a survey, which I checked and was really lightweight, Roger, really, really lightweight. And they said, look, we'll send a plastering team out to put some supports off the joists. And I mean, if that statement doesn't worry you, you know, I mean, their plastering teams weren't, you know, well, don't get me started. But luckily, I had some wits about me and said, no, send a structural engineer. That's what it requires. They employed a private independent structural engineer who came along, and this engineer, I've spoken to them since, they advised the company that a full structural survey of the roof was needed again. The purlins were sagging and under-specced, and they'd probably sagged more under the weight of the solar panels. The front of the house was also bowing out visibly.
So as the roof was dropping, it was pushing the walls out.
A combination of things where it was happening in reality, as we later found out. So the roof ridge had sagged, pushing the walls out. The purlins then had dipped, and that had pushed some of the rafters so far that they had disconnected from the ceiling joists, which were holding the structure together.
Yeah.
The whole thing had just completely shot Roger. If I had listened to the installer's original advice, who knows what would have happened. The structure would have continued to worsen for sure.
Just to be fair here, there will be people who are saying, well, you can't expect a solar panel company to renew your roof. Your roof was on its last legs, if you like. It needed some structural improvements to help it stop it sagging. It's an old building. But from the point of view of the solar panel installers, when they came along, they should have looked at the roof and said, we don't think this roof is suitable for loading with solar panels on top of the weight it's already struggling to support. So at that point they should have said, sort your roof out and then we'll put the solar panels on, rather than just go ahead and bung the solar panels on and make a bad situation worse. So I think that's fair enough, isn't it, to say that?
I absolutely agree in principle, but there's one thing I've got to take issue with, and that's the first thing I did after all of this, when I knew I had to replace the roof, and it was in the wettest winter ever, I think, recorded in the UK last year in 2024, I spoke with my home insurer, and they were really clear with me that no cover was available, because even if I claimed for accidental damage during my own attempts, the insurer would deem it as causal loss. They call causal loss. So the causal event there being the misdiagnosis of the roof and the need to replace it in the first place. So if the roof didn't need to be replaced because no proper survey took place and all of the problems that unraveled from there, the emergency scenario that unfolded, then obviously I wouldn't have found myself in a pretty ill state already, up on a scaffold on my own in all weather conditions with 4 tarps juggling away and just trying to do everything single-handedly whilst water flooded through the house below and literally destroyed every wall, every ceiling, every floor. So I mean, I got that question, who pays for that? Because it doesn't feel right that it should be entirely myself, which is the case at the moment. But I'm open to your viewers' thoughts as well.
Were they asking you to take the solar panels off, or were they going to take the solar panels off?
Yeah, eventually, after persuasion, they agreed to take the solar panels off so that work could happen on the roof.
And then presumably put them back when the roof was strong enough.
Which they kind of helped with. But the issue really, Roger, was had these panels not gone on, I certainly wouldn't have been replacing them.
Probably would have gone for another 50 years without too much trouble. I mean, you see roofs like that all over the place, don't you? 500-year-old buildings where they're sagging and twisting and warping, but still there, until you stick a load more weight on them.
Well, I had to do it in the end myself, which was bananas. And I wasn't in a place where I was making good decisions, rational decisions. So I decided, and the more I peeled back, the more I revealed that was wrong with the property. So when I peeled the front off, the back, it then became apparent that the wall plates and the timbers were completely rotten through and they needed full replacement. And then when you took the back of the roof off, the wall was so infected with damp and the mortar completely shot. And the wall needed rebuilding. So
the energy conservation on your property was a little bit of a sideshow. It was getting the building in a fit state, first of all, that you could start to even think about fuel bills.
Put a number of freedom of information and subject access requests in place across the industry. And from that information, I've got various call recordings back, and I can hear my kind of stifled and jaded voice at the time, trying to be positive even before the works began. And I had advised this company that several walls were damp and tried to kind of reassure them, I'm trying to do something about it, don't worry, trying to. And of course, they pushed for the works to start as soon as possible, irrespective of that, knowing that damp was in place. And of course, it's their responsibility to make sure that a home is in a fit state for these works to begin. That's not really the main thing that's saddened me in all of this. I actually moved here in 2021, end of COVID, housing stock was limited, and it was to be close to my daughter, who was 16 at the time, and she had a couple of years left before she went to university. So she's actually been unable to stay at the house since the work began in February 2023. So that's, as I say, 2.5 years now. Her room's been completely inaccessible because of the many works that have been going on. Definitely my biggest regret. I know obviously friends haven't been able to come over and stay and everything else, but that's probably the thing that's fueling my anger most.
You're still living in chaos. You haven't got a viable heating system.
That's another piece of the puzzle. So HICE, which were really pretty good in terms of all of the various accrediting bodies that I've spoken to. So HICE were the accrediting body for the heat pump itself, not for installation, but they claim to me that it's only 1 in 1,000 of these installs are physically checked. Of that 1 in 1,000, they are routinely finding systemic problems.
Yeah, well, I know all the trials I've looked at for heat pump installations have shown, or probably something like 40% of installations need some further work after the installation, a bit of tweaking, like you say, replacing radiators or whatever, just to bring them up. So even from the initial assessment, there's work to be done going back and tweaking them. So yeah, so has that worked? You said the radiators have been replaced 3 times.
Their policy is never to install triple convector radiators because they cost more money.
Well, they take up some room as well. If you don't know, you've got a 3-panel radiator sticking out in your room.
Not ideal.
Not great in a small house. So what have you got in there? Doubles or triples or what?
So it's now a combination of doubles and triples. So HICE actually found that the whole system, well, it was never actually designed in the first place. There was no heating system design. It was just thrown in. So the pipes were the wrong size. The pipes were actually fitted the wrong way around. Numerous systemic problems with the heating, and their recommendation was that the system was fully redesigned and put back into the house. Obviously, well, the current status of the house is that now that the roof has been replaced, I redesigned the roof the best I could according to the various problems of the property, and now there's no insulation in the roof at the back of the house in various rooms and roofs. It's open to the elements. The system has never been fully recommissioned, and I still have had no heat for 2.5 years.
Are the solar panels back on the roof?
Yep.
Solar panels are now working, but the bit you're missing now is the heat pump is not fully commissioned working.
Yes.
Is it working at all, or is it just that it's very, very expensive to run? Is that?
Hypothetically, if I switched the heat pump on today, well, firstly, I couldn't do that anyway because not all of the pipes were plumbed back into the correct locations, so they left me to do some of the work. And because of my ADHD, I'll start that job, turn the plumbing off, and it'll take me months to get back round to it. And that's what's happened this year. I've been left with immersion-only hot water, and so I would tend to switch on the immersion, leave it running all day, forget about it, then get a bill for 10, 15, 20 quid to run the immersion till I remember to switch it back off again. Hypothetically, if I plugged the ends of the pipes, turned the system back on, it would power up, but the system's still undersized. Again, they specified the system for a heat loss of 8,300. We believe it's 13,300. That system remains undersized for the house, and it wouldn't affordably heat the home if I was to power it back on. So effectively, I've got no heating now, no idea as to how this will be resolved in the future.
So where'd you go from here? For you, what would be the solution? What are you looking for? That's always a good question to ask people when they've got a complaint, is what would you want to see out of this now?
I've actually started some charity work, trying to track down other people affected and trying to support them as best I can, because there are people in some really dire circumstances out there that I'm aware of. Many tens of them I've been in contact with directly. So I've actually started a small charity to help these people and to advocate for people in receipt of government grants who systemically are not supported.
So what you're saying is there's really nobody representing these people, the consumer group, and that is a major problem, isn't it? Because they've got absolutely nowhere to turn to. Everyone's running away, and what you're saying is you're trying to help them, but they really need some proper structure. I mean, like if you're in touch with tens, there must be hundreds or thousands of people in a similar, not hopefully as dire as your situation, but people that have been promised a heat pump, found that it's not working, properly not heating their home, or that the bills are so high that they can't afford to switch it on. Because this is what we find. We've had a lot of the correspondence with people who are in housing associations. The housing association has said to them, you've got to have a heat pump, we're taking out your boiler. And then they've told them all the wonderful things that will happen when they have a heat pump, that it'll be cheaper, they'll be warmer, and then they find their bills are sky high and they're not warmer. So, and like you said to me in the initial correspondence, the big problem is that you can't switch it on and off. It's got to be left running all the time in order to work efficiently, or even to work. Which
is great if you're a working family with sufficient income to meet the full heat loss requirements of your home, in which case, in combination with solar panels, maybe a heat pump can actually potentially save you money, depending on the circumstance. But if you're someone that adjusts your heat according to your financial ability, then it's very rarely the case that you're ever going to...
It's not only financial ability, it's a little bit on the chilly side at the moment, but it's going to rise to 20 degrees by the weekend, so you wouldn't need your heating on. And if you've got a system where you can switch on and off, you might have just switched it on last night when it got a bit chilly. Towards the weekend, you wouldn't need it on at all. But the trouble is with the heat pump, you have to switch it on. It takes days and days and days to actually reach the temperature. And then you find, guess what? The house is too hot. Let's open the windows, open the doors, and get rid of some of this excess heat. So I don't think that the technology is versatile enough to cope with the British weather, basically, because the wind blows in a different direction in this country and we get completely different weather.
All of this can be very simply solved. The government has a duty of care. No homeowner should be in a worse position as a result of taking a heating grant. So often these homeowners are vulnerable in heat poverty. The fact that many hundreds, and I honestly believe thousands, people are in a worse position as a result of these grants. That should never be allowed to be the case. And the current system relies on installers to self-remediate. It's a devolved system, and they're simply not capable of doing that. Many of them go bust.
Yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? If you've got to go back to a string of properties and remedy them, why would you not just take the easy option and fold the company and start the new one? It's a dire situation, but I think actually your words there about nobody should be worse off as a result of taking a government grant is telling, because I think this will pave the way for compensation schemes in the future. Would be having people contacting us saying, have you been missold a heat pump? And then the whole sorry episode that we've seen countless times in this country seems to happen every few years. Have you been missold this? Have you been missold that? Absolutely terrible. And this idea that you're not allowed to go back. Quite honestly, if somebody gave me a heat pump that wasn't working, wasn't heating the house, was costing me a fortune, I would challenge them and say, I'm going to put the gas boiler back in, take me to court, because I think you'd have a great time in court with that one.
Well, this is it. So a court case is long overdue, and I feel that now that's one of the few really truly meaningful ways that we have to establish justice in this space. I've long given up on meaningful compensation for my own case. It's not what is important to me anymore. I really just care about getting the system reformed, getting to a place where no homeowner is put in a situation where they're not able to heat their house for multiple years with no end in sight. That should never be the case. There's a Facebook group that we started, Eco 4 Nightmares. They'll find that as a support group.
We do get lots and lots of emails from people who are telling us, that they've got big problems with their heat pumps and so on. And we also get people who tell us that they've had a heat pump and it's absolutely marvellous. So at some point the government needs to check their thinking, as they say. Good to talk to you anyway, Duncan, and we'll be in touch. We'll check how you're getting on with that and have a look at your Facebook group and see what happens. I'd like you to get a bit of heat there before the winter.
It would be nice. I don't have much hope, I'm afraid.
All right. Good to talk to you anyway. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Our survival depends on your support. Keep us going by watching another video, and if you want to go further, becoming a Skill Builder member makes a huge difference. Thank you.